this guide to navigating your paycheck, we're going to talk through how to think about allocating your money. This will be a part 1 out of part 3 series on this topic. And for part 1, we're going to focus on establishing your savings and spending plan. Now, when it comes to your savings and spending plan, there's 3 things to be mindful of: how you'd like to create it, the primary components, and then tracking. So as far as creation methods, you have the handwritten approach, where you're taking your bank and credit card statements and then handwriting your income and expenses to determine how much you could save. This is a manual process and is meant for those that are more old-fashioned and like to balance their checkbook, but it will take the most time out of the 3. Excel is a second method where you can still maybe need to capture that information and data from the statements, but you can then leverage the Excel tool to do the formulas and save you some time in that sense. But it still could be a manual process there. And then the final, which we tend to recommend, is using an online budgeting tool, such as a Monarch Money, for example, where you're paying technology on a subscription basis per month to auto-categorize your income and expenses. And this tends to be pretty affordable and takes a lot of the heavy lifting for you, so you don't have to spend your time manually capturing that information from your statements, right? The primary components of the savings and spending plan would be your net paycheck, your fixed expenses, your variable expenses, and then your savings. So your net paycheck is how much you're going to receive per month after taxes and employee benefit deductions. This is critical because it's your starting point for your savings and spending plan. Your fixed expenses, as the name implies, is expenses that remain fixed and steady and predictable, and you can reasonably expect them to be similar in subsequent months. So examples of this would be your mortgage payment, or your auto or student loans, or your Netflix or Hulu or other streaming platform subscriptions. Some of these you can't control, some of these you can control. You may not be able to control what your mortgage and your debt payments are if you've locked into those loans, but you can control how many streaming platforms you're subscribed into. So when it comes to allocating your resources, we want to prioritize those necessary expenses over those that maybe are less necessary, right? So you need to pay your mortgage, right, in order to live in your house. That's deemed necessary for your available resources, but you don't necessarily need to subscribe to all the different streaming platforms out there. Now, as far as variable expenses, these fluctuate each month and are going to change based on your usage and preferences. So examples of variable expenses would be your food costs, so like groceries and dining out, travel costs as well, how much you're traveling throughout the year, and then utilities could also be variable expenses as well. Similarly, there's variable expenses we can control and then we can't control. So in some sense, you can control how much you use your utilities, but you're not going to be able to determine how much you're paying the rate for gas and electric and that type of stuff. So you can't really control your utility costs, assuming that you use the same amount of gas, electricity, and water relatively the same each month. But you can control a lot of your variable expenses. You can control how many times a week you're dining out and where you shop for your groceries, if you're shopping at a more affordable chain or if you're trying to shop at a more higher end grocery chain. You can also control your travel and how much you're spending on travel each year and that type of stuff. So in the context of allocating your money and your available resources, again, we want to prioritize those that are more necessary for your survival if your resources are limited, right, as opposed to those that you can maybe push off until you have the savings to support that cost, right? So food and other costs like that, clothing, gas, those are things that are necessary for survival, whereas big travel trips, if you can't afford it, could be considered less necessary, even though, they have a time and place because they bring you fulfillment and joy. So that's a little bit about variable expenses. And then the final leg would be savings. So what I'm talking about here is savings outside of your employer provided retirement account, so outside of your 401k. And this could be like saving into a Roth IRA, a brokerage account, a 529 plan, or just a general savings account. So what we typically recommend to our clients is setting up a systematic savings plan. So every time you get paid, you can direct a certain amount of money to one of these savings buckets, and that's going to give you the highest probability of achieving your savings goals over time. So of course, the amount is going to depend on your cash flow and the rest of your expenses, your fixed and variable, of how much you can save. But it's a good practice and exercise to get in the habit of sending, say, a couple $100s a month to your Roth IRA or your brokerage account or your 529 every time you get paid, and then that'll lead you to a better probability of achieving your financial goals. So that's a little bit about saving. And then the final thing is tracking. And when it comes to tracking, we recommend at least once a month you're taking a look at your budget, your income, your expenses, and then making sure that you're not spending over what you're bringing in as far as income, and you're living within your means. You can also do an annual check-in as well, just to take a look at the previous year and see how much did I make, how much did I spend, how much did I save, am I on a good track for success financially. So hopefully this was helpful, and I wrote an article that provides a lot more detail, so click the top right of this video to check that out. Thanks. Bye.